There are some men who, no matter how bad things get, no matter how dire the situation, always find a way to prevail. They're winners. This is one of those stories. This is the story of Mad Jack. This is the incredible tale of Lieutenant Colonel Adrian Carton de Wiart. If there ever was a man who could claim to be immortal, it is he. Shot in the face, head, stomach, ankle, leg, hip, and ear, survived 2 plane crashes, tunneled out of a prisoner of war camp, and bit off his own fingers when a doctor refused to amputate them. Yes, you heard that right. He bit off his own fingers. At the end of it all, he looked back and said, "I don't regret anything. Frankly, I had enjoyed the war." Let me tell you about it. Born in 1883 in Brussels, then part of Belgium, but now part of Europe, Adrian Carton de Wiart was a British Army officer serving with the Royal Engineers. On August 6, 1915, while on patrol along the Belgian coast, he and his men were caught in the open by a German artillery barrage. One of the shells landed just 20 feet away from him. The explosion threw him into the air, knocked him unconscious, and tore off both his legs above the knee. When he woke up, he realized that he was bleeding profusely. His men quickly applied tourniquets to his wounds, but they were inexperienced and they did not know exactly where to hit. "It was very hot, the blood, and I thought I would faint," he recalled. "So I got up and walked to the shade of a tree and sat down. Then I fainted." He was evacuated to a hospital in England where doctors performed multiple operations to save his life. But when they went in for more surgery, they discovered that there was so much shrapnel in his legs that they couldn't salvage them. So they amputated both legs below the knee. As if losing both his legs wasn't enough, fate dealt him another cruel blow. Just over a year later, on October 2, 1916, while flying in a reconnaissance plane over Belgium, he was wounded again. A bullet grazed his face, leaving a permanent hole in his cheek, but that didn't stop him. He continued flying until he was hit again, this time in the stomach. He managed to land the plane, but when he did, he collapsed and was captured by the Germans. They took him to a prison camp where they beat him and tortured him to extract information. But he didn't tell them anything because he didn't know anything. He was just a poor guy who loved to fly planes and take photographs of the enemy. After 3 months of captivity, he was transferred to a hospital in Germany. He was wounded several times during the war, and each time he came back, he amazed doctors with his ability to heal quickly. At the hospital, he befriended a Russian prince who shared a cell with him. One day, the prince told him that he had a plan to escape. "We will dig a tunnel out of here," he said. "All we need is some time." They spent 6 weeks digging the tunnel with a spoon and a small knife. They made it just under the floorboards. It was a tight squeeze, but it was their only chance of escape. One night they crawled through the tunnel to freedom, but their joy was short-lived. They were soon caught and thrown into a cell. Once again, this time in Berlin. The Germans were furious. They had caught him twice and they weren't going to make it easy for him. They took him to a military court where he was charged with spying. He was found guilty and sentenced to 10 years in prison. The sentence was carried out in the infamous prison camp at Colditz. It was designed to hold Allied officers who had been caught spying behind enemy lines. The conditions were terrible, and many prisoners died of starvation or disease. But Carton de Wiart was not one to give up. He organized a group of prisoners who tunneled out of the camp. Once again, this time with a spoon and a knife. They dug for months, and the progress was slow, but eventually they were close enough to dig with their bare hands. One night, they dug a hole just big enough for one man to crawl through. It was dark and narrow, and the man had to go on his hands and knees. When he emerged out of the tunnel, he found himself in a field. He had escaped. The guards hadn't seen him. He ran as fast as he could until he reached a farmhouse. The farmer hid him in the barn and gave him food and water. Then he helped him to contact the resistance, who helped him to escape to Switzerland. After 4 years in prison, he was finally free. But his ordeal was not yet over. The Germans still considered him a spy, and they wanted him back. They offered him a deal, though. They would drop the charges against him if he agreed to be interviewed by the BBC. He accepted, and he was interviewed by the BBC. In fact, he became quite famous after that interview. But the Germans still wanted him. They sent a plane to pick him up, but it was actually a trap. They took him off the plane and put him in prison again. This time they accused him of being a spy and a war criminal. He was tried and sentenced to death by a German court. He was taken to the courthouse and shot in front of everyone. But before they could pull the trigger, an American colonel stepped forward and said, "Wait, I know this guy. He's a British officer. I want to question him myself." The Germans agreed, and the colonel took him away. It turned out that the colonel knew him from before the war. They had played polo together, and he was able to convince the Germans that Carton de Wiart was not a spy, but just a poor, unfortunate officer who had been wounded in battle. The Germans released him, and he returned to Britain a hero. But his troubles were not over yet. He was still missing both legs. So he went to see a doctor to get new artificial limbs. The doctor examined him and said, "I'm sorry, but I can't help you. Your stumps are too big. You'll have to learn to walk with crutches." Devastated, he left the doctor's office and went home. He refused to accept his fate, though. He pulled out his pocket knife and started cutting off his fingernails. Then he put the knife down and called for a taxi. He went back to the doctor's office and told him what he had done. The doctor was shocked, but he admired the man's spirit. He fitted him with new artificial limbs, and Carton de Wiart was able to walk again. He went on to live a long and happy life. He died in 1966 at the age of 83. When asked what he thought about his experiences in the war, he said, "Frankly, I had enjoyed the war. It was the best time of my life."